If you apply internal force to a solid, continuous block of matter, it vibrates, but it cannot walk. Yet a biological organism, composed of physical matter and subject to those exact same physical constraints, propels itself forward with effortless articulation. Aristotle formalizes this problem in his 8th book of physics with a strict kinematic law. Every physical movement requires two distinct elements. There must be an active object that imparts the motion and a separate passive object that receives it. A single uniform object cannot move itself. This creates an immediate paradox for biological life. Animals clearly initiate their own locomotion. Therefore, to satisfy the laws of physics, the animal itself must be divided into a moving part and a moved part. Aristotle addresses this by dividing the organism into an active soul and a passive physical body. The soul is designated as the origin of the movement, while the body serves as the subject that undergoes the change of place. But this introduces a severe complication. In Aristotle's framework, the soul is not a physical substance. It has zero physical extension, it has zero magnitude, and zero mass. A dimensionless entity cannot physically push against a solid object. It cannot be pulled, and it cannot be subjected to any mechanical friction. To bridge this gap between a dimensionless cause and a physical effect, Aristotle engineered a precise biomechanical chain reaction. Outlined in his treatise De Motu Animalium, it provides a complete mechanical derivation for how an unextended entity generates physical force. We can reconstruct Aristotle's derivation by starting at the very end, the physical body, specifically the limbs, interacting with the environment. First is the requirement for an external resting point. A moving body requires a distinct external prop that resists its force. If you place a mouse in a pool of yielding pitch, its legs will churn, but the animal remains stationary because the environment gives way. Motion fails entirely without a fixed external surface. This logic scales inward. Just as the animal requires the solid ground to push against, the moving limb itself requires an internal stationary point from which to generate leverage. This is the internal resting point principle. Biological joints provide the anatomical architecture for these internal resting points. They are the hinges allowing one part of the body to remain fixed while another moves. This diagram shows a joint functioning as a fulcrum, starting with line DB intersected by central point A. When bending, point A becomes 1 in magnitude but 2 in potentiality, acting simultaneously as the upper segment's stationary endpoint and the lower segment's dynamic start. However, joints are only relative movers. An elbow or a knee cannot initiate a walk on its own. It relies on the momentum and structural support of the larger organism to execute the push. If the peripheral joints only provide relative starting points, the kinematic system demands a single, absolute, unmoved starting point located at the center of the organism. Tracing the mechanical requirement inward brings the investigation to the anatomical center of the blooded animal, the heart. Here, Aristotle locates the perceptual soul. This cognitive center serves as the absolute, unmoved mover for the entire biological machine. This diagram shows the relationship between the central soul and bilateral limbs. Point A supports lines B and C. To function as a platform for simultaneous motion, like a bird flapping wings, the central point remains completely fixed while both body house pivot against it. This returns us to the initial paradox. If point A is the soul, and the soul has zero physical magnitude, it lacks the mass required to serve as a physical lever. Aristotle bypasses the need for mass entirely. The fixed point is not a physical object, it is an event. The actual cognition or perception of an object of desire acts as the rigid fulcrum. An event requires zero physical extension to occur. By utilizing a cognitive event as an extensionless geometric lever, Aristotle isolates an unmoved mover. The soul provides the absolute origin point without violating the kinematic laws of physical mass. But a fulcrum alone does not generate thrust. How does the abstract perception of a goal translate into the raw mechanical force required to actuate the limbs? Aristotle explains this translation through a mechanism known as the practical syllogism. While often misinterpreted as a psychological model of human deliberation, its function in De Motu Animalium is strictly mechanical. This flowchart maps the practical syllogism, a deterministic three-stage cascade. First, perception causes an endogenous thermal shift, heat for beneficial objects, chill for harmful. Aristotle calls this desire. This strikes the connate pneuma in the heart, a gaseous body expanding and contracting to temperature. The connate pneuma functions precisely like a pneumatic cylinder. It translates abstract heat into quantifiable mechanical pressure. As the pneuma expands, this pressure directly alters the physical consistency of the surrounding flesh, stiffening it and pushing the tendons to actuate the joints. This integrated thermodynamic sequence connects the mental state directly to the physical system. Perception and desire are qualitative properties of the body. The connate pneuma serves as the crucial moved mover, the distinct physical instrument bridging the gap, taking the dimensionless act of perception and inflating it into the mechanical motion of the animal. With the thermodynamic engine established, we can view the animal as a unified kinematic system processing environmental data. This diagram maps the system's architecture. Peripheral sense organs gather input at the top. The cognitive hub sits centrally. Active extremities are at the bottom. In voluntary motion, sensory input reaches the center, triggering desire and mechanical force. Involuntary motion simply bypasses this central mechanism. The central soul acts merely as a passing station, rather than an origin point. The resulting thermodynamic pulse reaches an extremity without central coordination, resulting in a localized twitch or reflex. True voluntary self-motion only occurs when the central cognition actively serves as the geometric and thermodynamic origin of the force. This highly centralized command structure raises a final operational question. How does a single origin point manage a complex, multi-part organism without micromanaging the exact angle and tension of every tendon? Aristotle addresses this efficiency by comparing the self-moving animal to a well-governed political city. In a functional state, the monarch does not need to be present in every district. The ruling authority only needs to reside in the central ruling sector to establish the law. The individual limbs operate like good citizens. Because they are structured for specific functions, they carry out duties automatically through their natural teleological habit. Once the central thermodynamic command is issued by the heart, the specialized biological nature of the leg, the wing, or the fin takes over, executing the movement according to its own localized mechanics. De Motu Animalium constructs a complete abstract kinematic proof. By defining the exact physical rules of motion and then building an engine of perception, heat, and geometric leverage, Aristotle solves the paradox of the living machine.